I don't even know where to start here, you guys. I do not even know where to start. After a week of horrific situations that were presented to me through consultations, I think I had about 31 or 32 consults last week. There was a repeat pattern that kept emerging, and that was spousal open work permits being refused, and on a scale that I had never seen before. And Igor and I, welcome Igor, thanks for being here with me. We decided that we had to tell the story. And I'll be honest, the one person I'm directing this to is this fellow right here, Minister Miller, because these refusals are not only harsh, but they are cruel. And if these officers who are making these decisions were immigration lawyers or other lawyers, I would describe it as sharp practice. Essentially, yes, it's legal, but you're taking and twisting things to the most absurd reality just to get the result you want. And what is the result that Minister Miller here wants? It's that he wants millions of people out of the country as fast as possible. So we'll pull Minister Miller back in a little bit, but this special live session that we're doing right now is geared toward anyone, whether you're a current post-grad work permit holder with a spouse right now, or a skilled worker with a spouse that you're intending on, trying to extend. We're going to talk a little bit about spousal open work permits. Stephen Murins and Deanna Okanachoff did a good podcast episode on the borderlines just recently talking about it. But what I want to talk about right now is the harsh realities and the nasty IRCC practices that we're starting to see. And to warn you guys, because the consequences of filing a spousal open work permit and not doing it right can literally mean the difference in your family being able to stay or not. Because to a large extent, a lot of you spousal open work permit holders are the breadwinners. Maybe your spouse is transitioning from a postgrad to, from a study permit to a postgrad work permit, and you're the primary income earner for your family. Well, when your spousal open work permit gets refused, sure, you can restore, but you can't work. And with processing times at, I don't know, what are they, Igor? Maybe you can pull them up and take a look. Processing times, I think, for work permits are probably around 155 days or something along those lines. At least I think that's what I saw when I most recently pulled this up. But the main concern that I have is the people that are unaware, that are following a practice that has been followed for years when it comes to applying for spousal open work permits. And now IRCC is being cruel. Igor, if you could also pull up the actual provisions and just drop it into Teams for me, and then I'll pull them up on my screen so that we can show people how the provisions actually play out. And maybe even within the actual instructions, there's enough there. But yeah, if you can just pull up the link so that I can get right in and dig right into the regulations, the section where it's talking about it must be submitted, and all the conditions that play into it. We've got a little bit of a side discussion going here, you guys, because we're trying to figure out the best way to approach it. So what are we going to do today? Well, a couple things that Igor and I are going to talk about. One is we're going to definitely share details of the stories of what happened, because you learn from the experiences of other people. And the hard part for Igor and I, as we meet with these people and we do these consultations, often there's nothing that we can do to assist them. And that was the conversations we had to have with 2 out of the 3 people that we spoke of. So if I could think of the one group of people that are going to be most affected by these changes, it's individuals who are transitioning from a study permit to a postgrad work permit and do not yet have the job lined up to support the level of work that you need to then have your spouse continue working. And let's just start, Igor, right from the top here, and right off the bat as a little introduction. So we know that recently the government decided to make changes to everything. And why are they making changes is because Minister Miller right here is bent on getting millions of people out of the country. So we've seen changes to the work permit provision to limit the ability for people to get LMIAs. We are going to be seeing the removal of job offer points for those seeking express entry. I'll pull them back up again. Recently, we saw the pettiness that the minister exhibited in reducing the number of economic spots or nomination allocations to the provinces because he didn't feel like they were taking on their fair share of the responsibility for refugees. And rightly or wrongly, to use that as a tool, like a stick, to say, if you don't do what I tell you, I'm going to punish you, and in turn punish all of the economic immigrants whose only pathways to permanent residence before their work permits expire are through the PNPs. And then to have this minister say, well, we're just going to reduce them by 50%, which means many, many people who have work permits expiring in 2025 are simply not going to have opportunities. So this is the introduction. This is the reality that's happening right now. We are in a world where IRCC is doing everything they can to refuse work permits, to refuse TRVs coming to Canada, basically to reduce the number of temporary residents, and also to reduce the number of spots available for transitioning to PR. So that is the climate. That's kind of the introduction to what we're going to talk about today. Like we explained, I'm going to shift over here and share my screen. On January the 14th, we finally received notice, although they hinted at this last fall, that there were going to be changes to open work permits for family members of temporary residents. Well, in this case, it's changes not only to the international students right here, but it's also changes to spouses of foreign workers. So international students already started to see limitations on who could get work permits. But generally speaking, if you were a spouse who was accompanying an international student, you had the ability to continue. If the study permit was needed to be extended, you could also extend the spousal open work permit. But the issue that comes up right now that Igor and I are going to talk about, and I'm going to have Igor talk a little bit about this, the background changes to with this announcement that we have here. But ultimately, the big issue comes when you're transitioning from a study permit to a post-grad work permit, and you have a spouse who has an open work permit that you're trying to extend as well. So please pay attention. Please stay tuned as we talk about this, because if you do not do this properly, if you do not set it up properly, you could be the subject of some really, really mean and nasty decisions of officers. And I say this without any equivocation. You know, Minister Miller's probably saying, come on, Mark, this is a little over the top. Maybe there's just a few examples. Well, I don't care if it's one example. The reality is we are seeing officers take very, very cruel stances within the adjudication of spousal open work permits in the context of them applying as an accompanying spouse on someone who's moving from a study permit to a postgrad work permit. So we will get to that. But essentially, these changes are all taking place. They were announced on January the 14th. And the other date that I want you to keep in mind is that they said it will become effective January 21st. So obviously that's 10 days ago. And there was a whole rash of things that were happening with spousal open work permits, all accompanying spousal work permits, ever since the fall, like I guess probably December 23rd, 24th, when they made the specific announcement that they were going to be cracking down on a bunch of things. As of that date, right through Christmas, the holidays, things started to go south. And we're starting to see large numbers of spousal open work permits refused. And once again, you guys, all of you who are out there who are on spousal open work permits now, accompanying an international student, you are the ones for sure that need to pay attention to this, but it's not just you. It's anyone that is on a spousal open work permit or intends to be on one going forward. So we've gone through and we've talked just a little bit kind of about the historical realities of the government wanting to get millions of people out. But Igor, can you just take a few minutes and just talk specifically about just these spousal open work permits and the changes? And I guess maybe what I'll do before I open up the floor to you to just cover the last little I just want to give just a tiny, tiny bit of historical context to these spousal open work permits. And they're coded C41, 42, 47. 41 is a spouse of an international skilled worker. C42 is the spouse of an international student. And C47 is the spouse of a low skill worker, which is essentially out the door now. C47s are no longer in existence, but that's kind of what we're talking about. But since the beginning of time, and I'll just shift over here, since basically 2002, when the new legislation was created, it's kind of ironic that I call it new. When IRPA was originally launched, spouses of skilled international workers could always get work permits. That wasn't an issue. Then there was a period of time where they allowed dependents, so dependent children, in some cases even as low as 16 years of age, to get open work permits to work with their spouses. Then I think it was about 2014 or so that the previous minister, Kenny, with the Conservatives, kind of cracked down on that and restricted it again so that it was only spouses of skilled workers. We're talking, in the old days, it was NOC A, OA, and B. Now it's tier 3, 2, 1, and 0. But ultimately, that's kind of how it was structured, just for skilled workers. Then I think it was 2022, Igor, maybe December, around there, they made the decision to open it up because they wanted families to have the ability to support each other, and that there were good policy reasons for doing it. That spouses of low skill workers were no less deserving than spouses of skilled workers to have the ability to work. And in fact, if you think about it from just a simple reality perspective, if you're a senior executive at a company, often your spouse doesn't have to work. You're making a good income. It's the individuals that are in the lower income brackets that really needed to be able to work more than anything. So that was just as early as, I think, December or so of 2022. Now flash forward to January of 2025. This is where I'm going to have Igor take over and explain what these new rules now mean. And I also want to point out that Igor wrote an awesome little blog post here and talked about, this was January 14th, right when they made that first announcement. And it was kind of a warning for people. Hopefully you're following our blogs on our website and the videos that we do. But 7 days to essentially becoming ineligible. And Igor was talking about the need to get those applications submitted ASAP. All right, so let's, Igor, jump in. I'll turn the time over to you.
Yeah, so it's been a while since we started talking about the potential changes coming. And very early in, actually, I think it was on the last day of 2024, we had a live stream with Mark, and we posted a blog post where we summed up the policies from 2024. And so the tone was, immigration is closing the doors, and we've talked about it in detail. And at that time, we knew that changes to spousal open work permits are coming. So there was a leak through the ATIB request that the minister was offered several options, and they decided that they will choose the option of limiting eligibility of spousal open work permits to specifically a very high tier levels. So tier 0 and tier 1. And we also knew that most likely, with like 95% certainty, the low-skilled spousal open work permits will no longer be a thing. And so we knew that's coming, but we didn't know when that's coming. And so I can't help but just give this as an example. A couple reached out to me about the spousal open work permit, which was refused, and they wanted to reapply. And I told them, like, look, changes are coming, and it's in our best interest to prepare this application ASAP. And guess what happens? The very next day in the morning, the changes are coming. And the changes are coming like literally minutes before, Mark, you had a consult with a guy who also wanted to consult on this specific topic. So it was expected and a little unexpected. And I have to be fair, like IRCC deserves kudos for at least giving a week time for those who have not filed their applications yet. Because sometimes we see that they implement the change like right away. There is no time for you to finalize and submit your application. So at least they gave some extra time. So now what are the changes? The changes are that first, to be eligible for the spousal open work permit, if you are a spouse of a foreign worker, and again, the changes concern the foreign workers and international students. So if you are a foreign worker, you had to be working in tier 0 or tier 1 occupation, So again, this is executive, professionals, and senior managers. Or you had to be working in a very narrow list of tier 2 and tier 3 occupations. And again, we encourage you to go to our website. It's the easiest way, I have to say it this way, it's the easiest way to find the list of eligible tier 2 and tier 3 occupations. So mostly those are the trade occupations.
And the reason for that, you guys, the reason for that is because if you go through here to try to find it, you actually have to dig through all the way down through the website in order to find the location where the list is. I don't know why they don't just produce it. So when they don't do something, we do.
Yeah. So yeah, like it's easier to find it on our website. And I have to be honest, it's not easy to find our website on Google, at least at this time.
Right now, yeah, we've got some issues with our website. Yeah.
Yeah, we're working on the SEO, but like it's still easier to find it on our website than on the government's website. But regardless, so that's the first major change for foreign workers and their spouses. The second major change for them is that your work permit now has to be at least 16 months, valid for at least 16 months. So essentially, if you completed the 1-year program and you received a 1-year postgrad work permit, and even if you work in, let's assume, tier 1 or tier 0, or an eligible knockout from tier 2 or 3, your postgrad is valid only for 12 months. And so you immediately disqualified from the opportunity to submit a spousal open work permit for your spouse. Then we had changes for international students. And so those were, and actually, I have to finish here with the foreign workers.
Right here.
So if you were working in tier 4 or 5, before you could submit a C47 work permit application, so for low-skilled workers. But from January 21st, you cannot do so. So essentially, they completely shut down the C47 work permits. Now, the changes also concern the international students, and for them, again, they limited the eligibility to graduates of, not graduates, but students enrolled in bachelor's, not actually bachelor's, master's and doctoral programs. Yeah. And there is a select list of eligible programs. So those are, again, very narrow list. There's a doctor of law, bachelor of law, doctor of optometry, pharmacy, veterinary medicine, and just a few bachelors, primarily in the healthcare sector. And Mark, there is a list of eligible programs. I'm not sure if we have a single viewer right now who's enrolled in one of these programs, but at least
like what is this?
A list. Yeah, so very narrow list. For everyone else, bad news, right? And it also comes on top of the changes to the postgrad work permit eligibility that was announced earlier in the end of 2024. So things do not seem really going well. And that's exactly what happened. But then we started seeing refusals. And those refusals were coming at a really bad time. So we talked about eligibility and harsh realities. Mark, so do you want to start here?
Yeah, so let's talk about these realities. So I touched on these just a little bit before. When we're talking about harsh realities, what we're talking about is the fact that you do not get a second chance with these permits. So we mentioned previously how it's so cruel to limit spousal open work permits for lower skill individuals when their spouses need to work to provide that income more so than even the skilled folks. But our friend right here, Minister Miller, wait a minute, make room for me, Minister. Minister Miller here and the Liberal government have made a decision that they want to reduce the temporary population, the overall population, down to 5%, which is like 2 or 3 million. I can't even remember the ultimate figure. But they figured, what is the fastest way we can do this? Well, the way to do it is to basically cut off the ability for people to get work permits. And when they can't work, they have to go home. And not just that. The harsh reality is the IRCC processing times. And so if for whatever reason you do happen to get, let's just pull it up here and we're going to look at it together. I'll pull Minister off and we'll slide over here, Igor, and we'll look at the processing times. This is something people have to factor in. When it comes, if you make a mistake on your work permit application, well, you're benefiting from maintained status if you file before your current work permit expires. But the problem happens when you get a refusal, because then you can see 125 days is what we're sitting at right now to process a work permit. So what is that? About a little over 4 months to process. So if your work permit gets refused, if you're a spousal open work permit holder and you do something wrong, like I'll be talking about in a second, and it gets refused, then you can't work. You cannot work even if you're eligible to restore. So this is a huge, huge part of what we're talking about. And so as we're looking at this harsh realities is that you do not get a second chance. You have to get it right at the beginning. And so, so as we're going through this, and we'll just jump to our next section here, the nasty IRCC practices. So I'll start off by just telling a few stories here. So one of the stories that I want to share is basically about a couple, and I'll give you a classic example. Excuse me. The example is when you are on a study permit, you're reaching the end, right? You're graduating and you're getting ready to transition to your postgrad work permit. One of the advantages of making that transition is that when you're going from a study permit to a work permit, once you receive confirmation that you've completed the elements of your program of study and you've met all the requirements and you're eligible for graduation, you have to stop working. But the benefit is that the moment you file your postgrad work permit application, you can continue working full time. So there's a weird kind of rule, and you can go back to our website, go through the blogs, and Alicia did a great blog talking about students and work and the transition to postgrad work permits and how you have to be careful. So all of that's a reality. But the biggest issue is what do you do with your spouse when your spouse is on a spousal open work permit? Well, it's easy to figure out that you have a job offer and everything when you're on an employer-specific work permit, but it's not so easy when you are applying for an open work permit. And as a part of the spousal open work permit requirements, you have to demonstrate that your spouse is working in one of those occupations, right? That's the current rules. Well, for this one couple that I'm thinking of, at least initially, and I'll tell about some other stories, at the time in which they were ready to file the postgrad work permit application, they knew that the spouse needed to have a job offer. And at the time, Tier 4 and Tier 5 was still eligible as long as you were not on an LMIA-based work permit. If you were in a low wage working on a postgrad work permit, your spouse could still get that open work permit. So they knew that if they filed the postgrad work permit, they would need to have a job offer, proof of that work experience for at least 6 months at the time, and in order to file together. But the spouse didn't. And this is maybe many of you as well. So on the date in which the postgrad work permit was filed, they decided to hold off on filing the spousal open work permit until the principal spouse got a job. That's what they did. So they filed that application, and it took a couple months before they were able, the principal spouse was able to find a job. So they found that job. They obtained payslip for work, the confirmation that they were employed, a reference letter, and then filed the the spousal open work permit with that evidence. The problem was, in the course of filing that, the postgrad work permit application had not yet been adjudicated. So it was basically, they were in that kind of maintained status at the time in which the spousal open work permit was submitted. And why did they have to file the spousal before the postgrad was issued? Well, because the spousal open work permit was expiring. Remember, the original spousal open work permit is typically only issued until the expiry of the study permit. So that spousal open work permit was linked to the study permit. Still valid. You can keep working all the way through. But then the person essentially changed from a C41 to then apply for a C42 effectively. But the C41, or I should say the C42 to a C41, so an spouse of an international student to spouse of a worker, a foreign worker in Canada. And so this is what's setting the stage. Anytime you do not have a job and you're filing your postgrad work permit, and then you later want to apply for a spousal open work permit, if the post-grad work permit has not yet been decided by the time you file your spousal, this is where the problem occurs. So here's what happened. Even though the spousal open work permit was filed a number of months after the post-grad was, and all of the supporting documentation was included with that spousal open work permit, except for the actual post-grad work permit, because it had not yet been adjudicated, they were still in maintained status. Well, what happened was, and this was early January, remember the timing on this, right? The 14th was when the announcement was made that the rules were changing. The 21st was the date in which it actually became effective. So in the case of this couple, the refusal came early January. And, well, the spousal work permit was refused because the officer said the post-grad work permit was not yet issued. So remember, they cherry-picked the spousal to refuse it deliberately so that they could refuse it versus processing the post-grad work permit first and then the spousal open work permit. So remember that the post-grad work permit, and there's a pattern here, was often submitted well in advance of the spousal. So if the true first in, first out processing that we expect within IRCC occurred, an officer should have looked at the post-grad work permit first, approved it, and then would have satisfied the condition for that second spouse to get the spousal open work permit because the post-grad would then have been in place. But that was not the case. So you must realize that when you file any kind of a delayed spousal open work permit application, and at the time in which the post-grad work permit was submitted, there is no guarantee that an officer is going to choose to process the post-grad work permit first and save the spousal open work permit. So effectively, it puts you into a position where you pretty much have to wait until the post-grad work permit is approved before you can file the spousal open work permit. Now, that's example one. I'm going to give you another example. This one is even more egregious. So in this example, I think the original post-grad work permit was filed in May, let's say, of 2024. And it wasn't until November that the spousal open work permit was filed, almost 5 months later, because they were waiting for the post-grad to be processed. Well, in this case, the kind IRCC officer, and I'm going to pull up Officer Miller right here and bring him back into the mix here so that he can listen carefully, because I'm talking into your ear right here, Minister. Your officer made the decision to process the spousal open work permit first on what day? January the 20th. Okay, what's the significance of that day, Igor?
It's the last day before the end of the old policies.
Yeah, January 21st. So January 20th, the officer sends a refusal of the spousal open work permit on January the 20th, despite the post-grad work permit being in place since May. Then, after refusing it, only a few hours later, approves the post-grad work permit. So in my mind, Minister, there is no rational basis upon which an officer should do that unless they're following your marching orders to try to destroy families and get them out of the country. And don't get me wrong. I'm going to slide over here, so I'm speaking for my own self. Minister, I'm going to have you drop off. Don't get me wrong. I am a full believer that if an individual comes temporarily, whether they're here to work or study, that there is no guarantee of permanent residence. I've told clients that since the beginning of time. Unfortunately, there's been a ton of messaging, both from the government itself, to overseas education agents, to schools, to anyone who is peddling the dream of PR, that there is a right to permanent residence. And there simply is not. So when people are in these situations, they are genuinely relying upon what they're told. And for many people, the dream of obtaining permanent residence was the whole reason they decided to study here in the first place. That's the carrot that was held out. But now, Minister Miller, right here, and I'll slide him over once again, and his government have determined that there are too many temporary residents here and we need to get them out of the country. That's their determination, the Liberal government. They created the circumstances in which all of these people have come, and now all of you that are here are facing the reality that the Liberal government no longer wants you here. So this is what is driving the ship forward with these refusals, at least in my mind. I don't know for certain if officers are just being jerks, just to be jerks, or if there's some kind of an internal memoranda that's going around that is saying, look, if there's an opportunity, these spousal open work permits are the perfect one, because all you have to do, if they're filed separately, is to cherry pick the spousal and refuse it, and then approve the postgrad after. Because most families will simply not be able to stick around without being able to work. Jobs will be lost, and they won't they won't be able to financially make it without that spousal open work permit being approved. And remember, this is not a situation where someone is taking some kind of a strange, strategic kind of loophole approach to getting a work permit. They are fully eligible and entitled to the spousal open work permit. It's just at the time in which the original application was submitted, that spouse transitioning from school to work was just looking for a job. And often that takes a little bit of time. So once again, at the time in which the application for the spousal open work permit was processed, the policy indicates that the postgrad work permit needs to be in place, or in some cases, maintain status is okay. But Igor, what is excluded in these circumstances from eligibility when you're applying for a spousal open work permit? Like, which group of people are excluded from being able to benefit from this maintained status?
So Mark, before I answer that, just a little remark. It wasn't a couple of hours after the spousal was refused that they approved the postgrad. It was 9 minutes after.
Really? Oh, I didn't even realize it was that bad. So clearly the officer, this is heavy-handed stuff. Yeah.
Yes. Again, just a reminder, listeners, the postgrad was filed in May. They didn't process it until the 20th of January. So that's at least 6 months, right? At the same time,
it's more than the regular processing time for applications. Yes. That's the issue.
Yes. At the same time, Mark, and this is a positive outcome, but like my client who applied for extension of the co-ed work permit got the extension approved in 14 days. And I have no idea if that's because of the special code that they use. But like, there's a very big difference between the 14 days and 120 days of posted processing times and 6 months of processing for the postgrad. And there is a very big difference between reasonableness and then the refused spousal and then the approved postgrad 9 minutes later. So, Mark, probably I would ask that you, take me to this page. And then if you scroll down.
So this is the one. Now, remember, you guys, we're post January 21st, so everybody here is screwed, okay? Yes. Just to put this into context. If you got your spousal open work permit refused, you rolled over to January 21st, you're hooped. In the case of those clients that we talked about, fortunately, their immigration consultant had the good sense to immediately file a restoration application because they then had the postgrad. But let's just look at the eligibility, Igor, and you can walk people through this.
Yeah, and just to, again, note here, so we're talking about two different situations. In one situation, the postgrad was filed in May, and then in the other application, and then the spousal was filed 5 months later. In the other situation, the postgrad was filed, and then the spousal was filed 2 months later. So just keep in mind, two situations. In the first scenario, where the postgrad was filed, and then spousal 5 months later, the refusal on a spousal came on January 20th. In the second scenario, the refusal came after January 21st. So as soon as they refused the spousal open work permit, this couple was no longer eligible because they were in tier 4 or 5. In the first scenario, because the refusal came on the January 20th, and the spouse, the postgrad work permit holder, was employed in a skilled occupation, they still could refile the application on the January 20th before the new rules kicked in. So they were okay for C41. Now then we had this this consultation with the client, and we started digging deep, right? So we looked at the eligibility at first, because if the officer's decision wasn't reasonable, we could still argue, you're not being a human being.
And we were hopeful that we would find some case law or something to support that this is just heavy-handedness. But here, and we even used the Wayback Machine to make sure that the information that we were relying upon was the information in place at the time in which they submitted their application. So you can see this page right here that's been updated was actually updated December 24th. That's when the magical announcement came that they were gonna really start to restrict things. But back to eligibility. Yeah, continue, Igor.
Yeah. So our initial assumption was, at the time when the application was submitted, probably the wording would be a little bit different, because we were concerned by the second line that you see in here with the highlighted at the time of decision. So you have to be eligible at the time of decision on your postgrad, on your spousal open work permit application. So this is what we were talking about when, let's assume you submit an application for a spousal open work permit while the postgrad is still being processed, and then your spouse receives the postgrad work permit, and you update IRCC with the postgrad work permit. So at the time of decision, the postgrad is already issued. It's impossible if they refuse the study permit first and only then approve the postgrad, because you cannot update IRCC. And this takes us to the first point in the eligibility requirement. So you have to be authorized to work in Canada by reason of either a valid work permit or provisional approval, right?
So in other words, the postgrad work permit. Yeah. So in other words, the postgrad work permit, if we're continuing down that path, is valid. So it's already been issued. That's option one, or
provisional approval. Right? Like it's just this email that you receive with the PDF that contains the little table saying, we mailed your work permit. Here's the provisional confirmation that you can work.
Yeah. And the couple, just to close the loop on the couple that got their refusals on January the 20th, the approval letter was issued, like Igor said, minutes after the spousal was rejected. So in their situation, or provisional approval allowed them to submit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or they could update IRCC and say, look, now we have the provisional approval. We just wanted to add it to the file. Here's the web form. Here's the provisional approval. So at the time when you make decision on my spousal open work permit, you have everything, because that's what the website says. And that would be a case if they would follow this order, first in, first out. But for some reason, they decided not to. So this is the first element, right? So you have to have a valid work permit or provisional approval. And then, Mark, at the bottom, it says, or,
except if the work permit was assessed under one of these, okay?
And then this part that says or, and what's below it, this is where the catch is. And this is what they use, and I would say abuse, right? So you can be in implied status, except for the situations defined in paragraphs F, V, or W. And Mark, if you click on it, this is why it's important to always go back to the source, right? So we are interested in paragraph W. So you are not allowed to have the spousal open work permit approved if at the time of the decision on your spousal open work permit, look at paragraph W2. Your spouse applied for a work permit before the expiry of their study permit, and the decision has not yet been made in respect of that application. And this is exactly where the issue is. So what's happening is the spouse applied for the postgrad work permit. At the time when they made a decision on the spousal open work permit, the former international student, the applicant for the postgrad, did not have the provisional approval letter. And so essentially the applicant for the spousal open work permit is excluded from eligibility under paragraph W2. of Regulation 186. And so this is like this tiny little thing. It's at the bottom of the list. It's almost the last point in the regulation. And it's so easy to miss. And people who are not trained to be lawyers or who do not have experience in this field can easily overlook it. And they think, okay, well, I will just submit this application. My spouse applied for the postgrad like 5 months before me. So obviously they will process her postgrad, and I'm just going to send a web form. And that would be a totally fine practice if everything was done properly. But for some reason, and again, we did not realize how cruel all of this was, they started issuing those decisions at the very last moment. So they didn't do anything on those applications. And then all of a sudden they decide to refuse them. And they refuse spousal first, and then 9 minutes later, they refuse the postgrad. Imagine what would happen like if they refused or approved the postgrad in the morning, and the person would send them the web form with the provisional letter, and then at that time, like they could still argue, look, I've sent you the provisional letter through the web form, like 2, 5, 6 hours before you decided to refuse my spousal application, because at the time when you issued the refusal, the web form was already sent. And that could be argued. You could challenge this refusal in court. Now, they essentially just deprive you of the opportunity to fight for what is at least humane. I would say it this way. Maybe not what's black and white on paper, but at least what's humane, and at least how things were done like in the past. And speaking of the updates, Mark, I cannot help but mention a third scenario that that happened even before all of these changes. So again, remember on January 14th, they announced that you will only have 7 days to submit your spousal open work permit under the old rules. So I had a consult with a couple. I think it was like January 4th or 5th. I don't remember. And Mark, what I've heard from them is that they've submitted a spousal open work permit application and let's assume, okay, we'll give them fictitious names. So John was a student in the university. Here, let's assume University of Calgary. And then Jane, his spouse, who had like 3 kids, was in, let's assume, Nigeria. Okay? And so when John was a student, Jane submitted an application for the spousal open work permit, which is the C42 work permit. That work permit application was refused, and Jane was accused of misrepresentation for some absolutely random, in no way supported like reason, right? So they would say, I don't know, your bank statement is fraudulent, and then good luck going and trying to prove that it's not fraudulent. So essentially, they refused that the spousal open work permit on misrepresentation allegation, 5-year bar. What do? So they went to court, right? They had to challenge the refusal. They could settle the matter. They used a help from one of our colleagues. The application was reopened. Then that application was refused because the officer was not satisfied that they had sufficient funds. Just to put in the context, they had 6 figures in their bank account. Regardless, so the officer refused the application. Then they decided to reapply. So they reapplied again on their own while John was still a student. It took them, I don't know how many months, but by the time that they were making a decision on the application, John already graduated from the university, applied for his postgrad work permit. His postgrad work permit was approved, and the decision on the spousal open work permit was still not made. So Jane, obviously, she's a conscientious person, and she deeply understands the importance of keeping IRCC up to date about the changes in her circumstances. So she sends them a web form saying, please note, my spouse, a former international student, John, has already graduated. He applied for his postgrad work permit. It was already issued. So here's a copy of the postgrad work permit application. So I'm just sending you an update, do whatever you need to do. And the officer does what he needs to do. He changes the category of the spousal open work permit application from C42 to C41 to a spouse of a skilled worker in Canada. And that will be all fine if the story would end in here and the officer would be and again, I have to be honest and direct, a reasonable person, right? So the officer needs to follow the training manuals that they are given. And obviously there is some training that RCC officers go through. The training policy manual that we found requires that if you change a category from C42 to C41, the officer needs to recategorize the application and send the additional documents request, asking for proof of employment and proof of payment to a former international student, to a postgrad work permit holder. Guess what happened in their situation? So the officer, yes, he recategorized the application, changed it from C42 to C41, and immediately refused the application, saying, yes, we understand you sent us the postgrad work permit, the copy of the postgrad work permit, but you did not provide us with the proof that your spouse is employed. So should she have sent the proof of employment via the web form? She could. Was the officer required to send her a document requesting requesting the proof of employment? He was under this obligation. Did he do it? No. Guess what? Refusal. Now they end up in the situation where they either have to go through judicial review, pay thousands of dollars, and just to remind everyone, judicial review is not a simple, quick process. It requires the application record. It requires you waiting for Rule 9 reasons. It requires you preparing the application record. And then, if you're lucky, if you fall within about 20% of the litigants, you will receive leave from the federal court, a permission to have a hearing, and then you will have to wait for a hearing, and then you will have to wait for the court to make a decision, and then your application, guess what, is not automatically approved. It's sent back for redetermination to a different officer. So you're back at square one after thousands of dollars and months of wait time. So it can take a year before you hear back from the court, and if you're successful. And again, about 20% of the applicants get leave, right? If they get to that stage. So for them, obviously, it was a no-brainer. Like challenging the refusal, yes, they potentially could do it, but it would be expensive and lengthy. And so the obvious reason for them and decision for them was to reapply. So they contact us and we tell them, like, you have to reapply. And I'm telling them, look, the rules will change. And we don't know when exactly. That could be tomorrow. That could be a week after tomorrow. It can be in a couple of months. Well, the rules changed. The very, very, very next day after we connected with them. And luckily, we could submit this application like 2 or 3 days before. And just to add on this, Mark, I don't know if you noticed, but like on the IRCC website, it said, our website will go through the scheduled maintenance from January 20th to January 21st. And we know what that means. That means that you cannot access the IRCC secure account. Sometimes it just kicks you back. Sometimes you try to log in and it just automatically resets everything. It doesn't save things. It doesn't allow you to access or exit your application. And then at approximately the same time, what we've noticed is that you would submit an application and typically right away you see a little table with your biometrics number and the status of your application, and you can download the confirmation that the application was submitted. For some reason, I'm not exactly sure, maybe that was the reason for them to do a scheduled maintenance. When you submit an application, you have to wait like about 24 hours before you get the confirmation. So I don't know, it's like the sinister feeling that everything was not coincidental. And it was, I don't know, I don't want to say it was staged, it was planned, but it certainly feels like it.
Yeah. I want to share just one thing, just so that people understand the context of what's happening here. So yes, tier 4 and 5, like, why are you telling this stuff, Mark and Igor? Like, yeah, it's a sad story, but how is that going to help us going forward? Well, the reality is, you'll see here, this is the instructions for tier 4 or 5. If we go back and we go to tier 1, okay, which 0, 1, 2, or 3, which now has changed. But if you go through here and you look at these same instructions, you will see and they will update the eligibility. The provisions are the same. Okay, the same eligibility fits, although obviously the initial qualification that you have either a tier 0 or 1, or the 2 and 3, that you fit within the right categories, as Igor has outlined here and tabled. Like, these rules still apply, but the eligibility factors are still alive and well, you guys. That it's at the time of decision, when they make the decision on the spousal open work permit, is the postgrad already there? That's the question if you're transitioning from a student to a postgrad. And then if you look further down here, it's still here. Unauthorized work except for W, which is essentially that implied period of transitioning from a study permit to a postgrad before the decision is made. And when you add on the lengthy processing times, this is a huge issue that people have to prepare for and be aware of well in advance. Because right now, like, the question is, well, how do you protect yourself? How do you deal with this in such a way that you're not going to get caught? Well, the very first thing that you do is, if you are a person who is studying and you're contemplating moving on and getting a different job, I think you already know that if you want your spouse to be able to continue on a spousal open work permit, your position needs to be, in that high T 0 or 1, or it has to be, if it's 2, 3, on the list of accepted occupations. If it's not, you're just not going to be eligible. But you have to prove that you're going to be working in those positions. And you need to do your work so that you are ready to go before you submit your postgrad. You must submit your postgrad and the spousal open work permit together if you want to preserve the ability to fix it. And Igor, the interesting thing about this, if you are in a situation where you're submitting both the postgrad and the spousal open work permit together, but you have not yet identified a job, you run a massive risk that it won't work out. Mm-hmm. So an officer can go through and assess, and if you truly haven't found a job and you can't include it, then of course the spousal open work permit is doomed. But if you are able to find one and then through a web form update both of those files, there's still no guarantee that an officer can't be even more of a jerk and choose to process the spousal open work permit first, even though they were submitted together. Now, I think if I was to pull up Minister Miller here and ask him if that's the intention of his officers and the instructions was to literally cherry pick spousals when they're submitted together and just refuse them first, just out of malice, I'm pretty sure he's going to say, no, Mark, we don't do that. But there's no guarantee, that they have to follow that path. Now, if you take this to the most absurd kind of consequence, you could say anyone who is, applying for any type of a work permit directly at the port of entry that comes from a visa exempt country, who has their spouse with them and are also applying for a spousal open work permit as an accompanying spouse, that process, border officers always adjudicate the principal applicant's work permit first and then the accompanying dependent second. That's just the natural course of things. And I would have to assume, Igor, that an officer who's processing these applications would do the same if it was an online application. But there's nothing in the regulations that say they have to. It's just common decency. So why, Minister Miller, are your officers taking the position now where they're going to cherry pick the adjudication of the spousal open work permit first, just because they know they can refuse it because the postgrad has not yet been decided? And maybe there's different officers processing. Well, I'm sorry, with the way AI, Chinook, all of the things that you have in place, including GCMS, there is no world where one officer processing the spousal open work permit can't easily look to see that there has been a postgrad work permit for the principal spouse that has been filed well in advance or at the same time as the one that they're currently processing. So, I'm really calling out the minister here, and I'm going to shift back here to this screen. You can stay here. The reality is we need the officers to show some semblance of humanity when they're processing these applications. Because the examples that we gave, like, this is just, we're a small little firm. I'm sure that there are people out there that are going through the same thing, and we will get to some questions here in just a bit. But as far as protecting yourself, you have to be prepared and never put yourself in a position where you're going to leave it up to an officer to use their discretion. Because right now, and this is the message to Minister Miller, is this the message that you want to portray to people? Sure, I get it. You're saying we're putting these things in place so people go home. I get it. But do you want to do it at all costs? Is that the message that you want to send to your officers, that find every possible way that you can refuse so that people will go home, even when they're otherwise fully eligible? And it's just the timing of when you choose to process one versus another. Is that really the message that you want to send to the world? But I don't know. Maybe you don't care. Maybe you see the writings on the wall and you're going to get, you're going to lose the election anyways. I don't know. And you're just going to take down as many people as possible. But right now, from what I've seen from you, Minister, including the pettiness with the whole PNP issue and tying the allocation of PNPs to provinces based on their willingness to play ball on the refugee file, I think that that's just sending the wrong message to the people we most want in the country. And I'm not saying by any means that we don't want refugees to play a role, but I'm saying the people that we've already invited here, that are here now, that because of your policies, their dreams are shot. They're done. So
yeah. And
that's
Mark,
the message to the minister. Yes, Igor.
Maybe I can also mention here, there's a comment from Bill Nye. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his last name.
Is he the science guy?
No,
Nye,
it's
the science guy?
Closer to the to the end of the chat. So he says, I think Miller is doing a great job. Someone has to make tough decisions to get things under control unless you want the public to fully turn against immigration. So I wanted to address this. I would agree with you, Bill. Yes, he's making tough decisions, and he's making those tough decisions himself rather than grandfathering them in to conservatives after the elections, which is understandable from a Canadian perspective, right? Like, we care about our country first. But I'll have to be honest, like, when you have to make tough decisions, there is a balance, right? And the balance is that you don't want to make it at the cost of rule of law. And so what we see recently is that sometimes IRCC officers reverse the order in which they process the applications, or don't process the application for 5 or 7 months for no reason, and then all of a sudden issue the approval of the postgrad 9 minutes later after they refuse the application. And it's easy to write a comment like this and not like, if you don't connect with the people and see them crying and saying like, look, I have 4 kids, and now my spouse needs to go back. I'm trying to make a living together with my wife, and I'll have to be honest, sometimes it's hard for us to pay the bills, pay our mortgage. And I consider that we are pretty well established here in Canada. I have no clue how singles are surviving here in Canada, and how the international students who took on the loans or sold their house or collected the money for them to go and study in Canada, through the whole village, everyone chimes in and collects the money for them to pay for their tuition with the hopes that they can become someone. And they would be helping other people as well. I've been an immigrant myself, and I can relate to every single one of them. And I have to be honest, I am extremely lucky that I came to Canada before all of this nonsense. And I understand, yes, politics. I understand the elections. I understand the overall goal. But when we are dealing with individual clients, we're dealing with individuals and their whole lives and the lives of their children, and the impact that they will suffer for years because of the political games. And yes, I have to be honest, I understand that when an international student comes to Canada, they swear and they promise that, look, I'm just coming here to study, and then I will go back home and apply the knowledge back in my home country. Yes, but at the same time, we have to remain humans. This is what separates Canada from North Korea or other countries where the individual's fate and life is meaningless, and it's all done for the global good. This is what makes us Canadians, caring for each other and remaining human beings, understanding that if for some reason you have to make a tough decision at the cost of rule of law, it's not just a decision. It's not just formality that you write on paper. It's a direct and real impact on someone's life.
Joe says here, I have lots of friends graduating soon who worry if their spouse can even get a work permit. On our end, we are waiting for the Alberta Advantage immigration program with allocations halved, fingers crossed. And this is exactly what we're talking about, Joe. Obviously, one of the things that we do, and I'll pull up the last little message here, is, how we can help. Well, one of the things that we do all the time, and, probably more so than many firms, like I think I had 31 consultations last week. We do short little consults for people where we can give them the information that they need to be able to make proper decisions, including, am I really eligible? Because these rules are complex, they're complicated. And so in short little consults, we can give people the assistance they need if they want to continue forward and do things on their own, and alternatively, we're always here to assist and people in filing their applications and preparing them. I just did one this morning for one of the very few fortunate people. He had like 540 CRS points and was able to get his express entry, his ITA, and we submitted the EAPR literally in days of getting the ITA. But I've had a number of other consultations where people have gone through, submitted their express entry applications, made a mistake and got it returned. Well, I don't know how many times I say this, but for many of you, you may never get a second chance at getting your spousal open work permit approved, at getting your express entry application approved, or virtually anything, even the PNPs, where many provinces are reluctant to reissue a new nomination if something bad happened in the PR portal when you're filing. So keep that in mind. So one of the ways, obviously, that we help is we clarify and provide the actual legal basis upon which to make decisions. And many cases, when people book consults, I point out to them, and this goes back to the other comment that we had from Bill Nye, I advise them that it is in their best interest to actually return home. That is the best option for them, is to go home, preserve the right to maybe come back in the future because they have no options going forward here. No, don't file a refugee claim. No, don't file some H&C that doesn't have any foundation or basis. No, don't marry your true love who you're paying $40,000 to marry you. Like, don't do any of those things. Follow the rules, comply with the temporary conditions, and go home. So that is often a discussion I have with people when they book a consult and they're wondering if they should take these drastic measures, because there's a lot of reps out there that are just taking advantage of people filing things when they know bloody well they don't have a prayer of getting approved, all because they're preying off of people who are desperate. So that's not what our firm does. There's links in the description below if you want to find out how to book a consult. You just go to our Holthe Immigration Law website and it's all right there. I'm going to point out just a couple other things as we get to some more questions. Igor's done a great blog that explains all of this about spousal open work permits. I also want to point out that Alicia and I are going to be dropping our next podcast episode probably on Monday, and it is all about bridging open work permits because people are constantly making mistakes with them. But go check out the other episodes in our Time's Up series, which is all geared towards you guys who are running out of time in Canada. And of course, our YouTube channel has a ton of content as well. But the reality is our blog post right here, Alicia, just as a prep for our podcast that's coming on Monday, go check out her blog post, which is excellent. It's all about bridging open work permits and the difference between an open and a closed bridging work permit. The reality is that if you screw it up, just like all these spousal open work permits, you may never get another chance to fix it. And she goes to great lengths to break it down. It's a wonderfully well-written and comprehensive blog post. So I recommend that you guys go check that out. Okay, we've got 22 minutes before my next consultation, Igor. So let's jump in.
My call with my client starts like in about a couple of minutes. So
does it? Okay. Well, I can stick around a little bit longer. I actually asked Prem to, and thanks to Jason, who has agreed to meet with me at 2:30 instead of 2. There's just so much for us to talk about, and I want to get to listener questions. We've got some people that are posting super chats that have some pretty strong opinions, and the reality is, like, everybody is free. This is a free country. You can say whatever you want. So Marco's got this position on, he's glad that tariffs hit Canada. we botched immigration. I'm assuming you're describing yourself as a Canadian, fueled fentanyl deaths, led ISIS in the US, 51st state, Trudeau, Peso, JT for treason. Okay. All right, Marco, that's your position. Do I agree with what you've got there? Well, no, largely I don't. I don't think tariffs are good for Canada. I do believe that we botched immigration. I do. I think there was way, way too many people accepted in as international students that fed the fuel for everything else. As far as the fentanyl deaths and ISIS and 51st state, Trudeau, Peso, well, maybe. JT for treason, well, he's done a lot of things that I don't agree with, but to that extent, I don't, so the reality is, no, I don't agree with most of what Marco's saying here, but everybody has an opinion. That is why Canada is so awesome. And that's why Igor and I don't hesitate to pull up comments that maybe we don't agree with, but we don't hide them or pretend. And we're not just money grubbing lawyers who are just desirous for millions of people to come in so we get more clients. That is not our mission. And so I hope you guys sense that. I hope you can feel that.
Mark,
Okay.
Maybe I can also add here before I drop off. 51st state and JT for treason. I think these two things go against each other. I think the treason is when you don't support and don't value the independence that we have as a country. So that is treason. Not going to dive into the assessment of Justin Trudeau and what he has done. But I think what we have to cherish as Canadians is our independence and our country, and not sell for the 51st state and walking under the stars and stripes. So that probably would be my comment in here, because a little bit over a year ago, I became a Canadian citizen, and I was born in Ukraine. And what I realized, and I actually never thought about it. When you become a Canadian citizen, you submit your application, and obviously you have to spend years in Canada. You have to integrate, you have to show that you're a good Canadian and a good member of the society. But then one last step, without which you will not become a Canadian citizen, is the oath. And the oath says that you swear that you will be faithful and bear true allegiance to the King, and that you will faithfully observe the laws of Canada, including the Constitution, right? Which recognizes and affirms the Aboriginal treaty rights, and that you will fulfill your duties as a Canadian citizen. And this text doesn't seem this touching when you just read it off the screen, but trust me, the feeling that you experience when you say it out loud, raising your right hand, and when you realize what you have gone through to be at that place, at that time, is something crazy. It's like, it's the experience that is life-changing. Like, it's years of your efforts. It's dozens and hundreds of specific individual acts that make you a valuable member of Canadian society. So for that, for people who say the oath to become citizens, it actually means something. When you are born in Canada, nobody's asking for your oath. It's presumed. And I think that's a difference. I think like when you say 51st state, you just don't understand the sense behind the oath that you take. And I was not born in Canada, but now as a Canadian citizen, I'll tell you this is our country that we have to defend, and we have to appreciate hundreds of years of history that's behind this Constitution, that's behind every fellow citizen in here. So treason for Justin Trudeau, maybe. I'm not the one to decide, but I think it's treason not to respect your own country and its independence.
Yeah. And I think this is also just an example of the tension that exists right now in our country. There's a lot of people who are suffering, who are genuinely hurting because of government policies and the way things have been run. And when you feel like you don't have a voice, well, it's pretty easy to post any kind of comment you want on, a YouTube channel. And I think often when people are posting those comments, they would never say those things, to your face in a conversation. They're not terribly defensible. They're more just a way to kind of just lash out because you're angry. Maybe you're angry with life. Maybe you're angry with the situation you're in. Maybe you see opportunities that you would have otherwise had go to someone else, and you just feel like you're left behind. So I always have a healthy level of patience with people and who are making comments online, just for the simple reason that we don't know where people are coming from. But the reality is, Igor, I agree with you 100%. I love this country. 51st state? No way. The reality is, we as Canadians should be proud of our heritage. We should be proud of our country, where we've come from and where we're headed. And as far as I'm concerned, if we have a government that is, not proud of that, well, I don't want them as my government, and I'm ready for change. And I really am. And I can't wait till the election to see where the voice of the people really is. And I think there's a bright future for everyone. I really do, even for people who may not be able to stay. When you comply, and please go back and listen to the Time's Up series, because Alicia and we did a podcast episode specifically directed at why you should not stay, basically overstay in Canada, and the consequences associated with it. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. I think we even cover it in, I think we even covered on the YouTube channel, but it's basically this episode 150 entitled, I guess I shouldn't play it here. Let's see. Oh, I guess this just plays it, but it's entitled The High Cost of Staying in Canada Legally. So please watch that, as well as all of the other ones, because we really have created this whole series to flush out answers that can help you guys in your journey. And it breaks my heart when I see what people are going through. And I got into immigration because of the people. I could have stayed at the national law firm. I could have done international law, whatever. Not immigration, but it was always the people that drove me to this, and not to line my pockets with money. My goodness, Igor, if we had a stable full of, a stable, as I call it, full of, each 5 paralegals, we could probably easily do that much work and just have them all pump out the files, and we would never see you or talk to you. But that's not how we operate as a firm. We have a select number of people that we are able to take on, and we work with you directly. Like I said this morning, I just did that, and we love doing that. That's the model that we prefer. All right, I know you've got a place
Mark,
to go.
I'll have to drop off.
Yeah, you do that.
One thing before I go.
Yep.
One of the beauties of living in Canada and being a citizen is our opportunity to be the voice of change ourselves. If you don't like the government, you can become one. You can join the government. You can do good things to make this country better. And that's the beauty of it. And we have a right to express our opinion here in the comments or in the elections. And that's something that we have to love this country for. Not many countries have that.
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks, Igor.
I'll have to say goodbye to everyone. I'll have to drop off.
No problem.
Okay. It was really nice to see you, Mark.
You bet. Thanks, Igor. All right. So there goes Igor. So let's get to some questions here. And I'll just pull up, and Chaitanya, I'll give you a shout out. I can't wait to talk to you. Citizenship and family and all that kind of stuff, the different things that we do. It's been a pleasure working with so many of you over the years. And I love when you guys come back and post comments, and I look forward to continuing to work for you and helping you to with your family. All right. Okay. Here's a great question. This is from Batman. Good to see you. He's an H-1B open work permit holder. Wife got her dependent work permit approved. We're planning to move up north next year. Will this spousal open work permit change affect my wife's work permit? We haven't activated our work permit yet, just have POE letters. Activate the permits. Now, one of the, you need to activate it, okay? The adjudication of the application has been completed. And so your spouse will be able to get the work permit, but I would not delay it. The border officers are making a lot of interesting decisions these days, and you don't want to be in a situation where an officer looks at it and says, well, wait a minute, no, the rules have changed, and technically I can still revisit this based on the current world, and you just don't want to take a chance. So I would try to activate it as soon as you can. Okay. Yes. Jimmy says it's crazy how often IRCC changes their mind with little to no notice. That is true. Very little notice. Let's see. Okay. Kai Wolf. Hey, here's another comment. Says, God bless Donald J. Trump. He is the best thing to have happened to Canada in the long run, and the world. Well, everybody has their opinions. I am not a Trump hater. I'm not. Do I agree with everything he says? No. But as a conservative, both a social conservative and a fiscal conservative. I hope that Poilievre gets elected and that there's change that happens in Canada. And so I'll leave it at that. Okay, zooming down here. Satya, and this is one thing I want to point out to you guys. Sometimes you'll ask questions that are going to be very, very specific, and I won't be able to answer them in this live stream, because for the simple reason that it requires facts. It requires time to give proper legal advice, and I'm never going to do that in the context of a live YouTube video like this, a live stream. So if it does reach into that area, then I'm going to direct you to go book a consult. The links are in the description below. Okay, Satya says, I have a question. If I applied for postgrad on January 21st and waiting on the postgrad, which is for 3 years, I will get, and also if I have a tier 2 job mentioned in the list, can I apply for spousal work permit in impending implied status? This is the exact situation that we talked about with those examples, Satya. And the reality is, if you're a tier 2 or 3, there's no guarantees. It depends on the job that you are that you're going to fill, because the spousal open work permit is contingent on you fitting into those restrictions. And let me just pull it up here quick, and I'm going to pull up Igor's changes. I'll slide over here. We don't have Igor with us, so we'll just remove that off of there. Okay, so you'll recall we talked about these changes, and so the new changes are specific. If you are in a tier 2 or 3 occupation right here, then you have to fit within one of the eligible occupations in these lists here. So just head on over to holthelaw.com, HOLTHELAW.com, and just click on the blogs, and you'll be able to find this, or you can just Google it too. SOWP changes are here. Probably pull it up on Google. Okay, back to this here. Okay, so yeah, I encourage you to book a consult. Okay, Tony says, I have a postgrad and received it last June for 3 years. My spouse is a registered nurse. We applied for his work permit extension. AOR was received last July, but no updates yet from IRCC. Processing times are crazy. They are. Like, you should have received something by now, but we've seen ones that have been extended for a very long period of time. Obviously, if you want to book a consult, we can chat about it. But the reality is, for you, I'd do a GCMS request. I would do an ATIP to see why it's hung up and what the issue is. Acknowledgement of receipt. This is well beyond the processing times that they've talked about. Okay. Let's just see here if we can get to, I don't see, okay. Okay, Batter says, hello and thanks for all the help and the information. My question is, I'm eligible for the FCIP as I live in Kelowna, so please can clarify, how can I apply for this program? Well, it's just been released. The program details are on the government website. This is the Francophone community immigration pilot. The eligibility, I've tweeted about the eligibility, but ultimately go to the website and take a look. Follow the instructions. It's so new. It's not something that we're going to be able to just clarify here in this. This is all focused on spousal open work permits. And that's kind of the direction that those questions are the ones that I'm going to be focused on answering. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Okay. Nisal says, can we renew a tier 2 closed work permit together with spousal open work permit, I think, using low wage LMIA? It's all based on your tier. So is your occupation with a tier 2 on the list that we talked about? That's what it comes down to. Is your occupation on the tier 2 or tier 3 eligible occupation lists? If it is, it's more focused on the NOC code and less focused on the actual wage that you are receiving. Okay. All right, JP's got a question about a refused spousal open work permit extension. First application was refused. Second application submitted while original work permit still valid. Will you be considered maintain status after expiration? Once again, JP, this is one that I can't tell you one way or another with any degree of specificity. I recommend you book a consult. If the original work permit is still valid, then maintain status should still be available, even though there was an earlier refusal. But I strongly recommend that you book a consult and we can look at it, because I'm sure there's details there that are just not coming to light. Okay. Let's see. I'm trying to find the ones. Okay, I'll pull this up. I know it was responded to. Loud FAQs. No, this is not saying. He says, does this video simply saying that every spousal open work permit will be refused even when meeting requirements? No, that's not what we're saying. And I think Tony did adjust that. He says, wrong. That's why I need to listen attentively. Good comments, guys. I'm just reading some of these comments. Okay, so this one here, this question here from AA Pathways, I strongly encourage you to book a consult. It's not something that I can answer in here. Lots of calls coming in. I've got 5 minutes left. Let's see if we can get to some more here. Let's see. Okay, Common Sense says, I don't know. Right is right, wrong is wrong. We can be soft Canadians suffering two Canadians first. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, this is a tough one. Loud FAQs. Spousal open work permit was refused, stating I provided insufficient information to demonstrate that my spouse's employment is in a qualifying tier. All required documents were provided. This was before January 27th. This is what we're seeing. And in some instances, judicial review is the only option, like challenging in federal court if you did everything you were supposed to and it still got refused. So I recommend that you book a consult. Sebastian says, Igor, you get it. Sometimes it's easy to give an opinion about something without fully understanding the reality of other people. You always have to take that into consideration. Hanging Out says the Canadian politics with immigration is in sheer disregard for humanity. If Canada is not willing to accept people, I think it's better to close the border for 1 or 2 years rather than taking people's application fees and denying them. I agree that they're absolutely, they need to be smart with how they are, creating and following policy. Like the policy has to make sense. Okay. Suliet says, thank you, Mark. I was waiting on your views on this. Nice chat and breakdown, Igor. Okay, great. And then Bill says, well said. You bet. And that's the thing. Like the reality is if we just have dialogue, we just talk about this instead of just the vitriol that exists, the separation into camps, and people are just so entrenched in whatever side they're on that they just refuse to talk. And I think much of the problems that exist, even right at the top within Minister Miller here, his like the battles that he has with him and Polyev, and now like just the way he approaches things. I've never seen a minister like this before. And I don't know why, Minister Miller, like you're under a tremendous amount of pressure. You've been the scapegoat essentially after two previous ministers put you guys in the situation you are as a Liberal government. The reality is you've had to bear the brunt of it. I'll make all the bad decisions, be the bad guy. I get it. But still, the way you communicate online and via Twitter and, X, your comments, like it's not helpful. Like I wish you would be more open and that you would, that you would, instead of just quoting your own self in the mainstream media, that you would, you would actually offer constructive things and just take a more positive spin on things. Because right now it just seems like all of your posts are just really vindictive and just angry and it's hard to say. But anyways, I'll leave it at that. You can do better, Minister Miller. You can do better. Okay. Okay, so JB says, hey, Igor and Mark, I saw that Newfoundland secured the original PNP quotas following restoration of the slashed quota. Well, I guess maybe they were playing the game that Minister Miller wanted them to play. It's hard to say. I'm pretty sure Danielle Smith here in Alberta is probably not going to play ball that way, but who knows? Kibbutz says, if I have to go, I will never come to Canada. I can do more money out in my IT career. It's true. You may be able to. And yes, Common Sense, I agree to some extent that the government crushed freedom of speech and everything. There was absolutely a lot of that stuff that happened that I wish that there just would have been more open dialogue and willingness to talk and hear people out. Abdul says, "Hey, Mark, thank you for really helping. And my PR application is the best. Mark is the best lawyer." Well, I don't know if I'm the best lawyer, Abdul, but no one cares as much as I do about what we do in our firm and for our clients. That much I can confirm. Let's see what else here. Batter says, "Hello. Thanks for all the help and the information. You're very welcome." Elisa says, "Mark, how much do you charge for a TRV from to reapply from Mexico? It will reuse because they said my husband is not going back to Mexico." Okay, if it's a resubmission, it always starts with a consultation. So Elisa, book a consult, and then we can chat about how we go from there. Okay, let's see what else here. I'm trying to find ones that relate to spousal open work permits. Yes, SS, spousal open work permits and postgrad work permits may not often be processed by the same officer, but GCMS allows them to see very clearly everyone that has submitted applications. And in each of the examples that I gave, the person filing the spousal open work permit actually included confirmation of the original postgrad work permit being filed. The file number, all the other supporting documentation, there was nothing that would, that would have been missing to allow an officer to just pull up and see that there was a postgrad work permit in place. And when you have an officer choosing to just refuse it versus holding or waiting till the postgrad work permit has been adjudicated, especially when the postgrad work permit has been in process for over 6 months beyond the regular processing times, that's where I feel it's sharp practice. Diaspora says, "Applying postgrad together with spouse work extension with tier 1 job offer on 22nd of January. Well, you're a tier 1. You're within the rules. So good luck. JP, you're welcome. Applied postgrad together with spouse work me same job. Okay. Yeah, and you're saying you hope that it's okay. Well, I can't say one way or another. An AA Pathways, thank you. All right, guys, I think we made it to the end. I don't know if there's any other questions or comments, but I've got to jump over to my consultation. I think you guys probably are aware by now that this was all about some really horrible things that I was seeing the government do with respect to the processing of spousal open work permits. And never, ever before, you guys, has there been a time where you have to get it right from the beginning. In the past, officers showed a lot of discretion for people that were in Canada. I saw officers not take any heavy-handed enforcement to international students who worked more hours or who maybe didn't follow perfectly the rules associated with the conditions on their study permit, where they were willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. I saw there was a time where people were applying, for example, the TR to PR pathway, where lots of discretion was shown. And so those days are gone. And, Minister Miller has made it very clear that he wants you to go home. And if you do not have a pathway forward, you're kind of stuck with it. So, I wish that it was, I wish it was different, but this is the world we're in. I had spoken with previous ministers myself when I was the national chair of the Canadian Bar Association on the dangers of allowing so many international students in. I've spoken with my local MP. I've had as many discussions as I can with other MPs across the country. And the reality is we're in the situation we are because Minister Miller, his government, made decisions based on what they thought was in the best interest of the country. And now it's all backfiring. And unfortunately, the politics of our country is significantly influenced by immigration. It has become a wedge issue. And I just have said this many times that I'm just shocked how the Liberal government is basically doing the dirty work of the Conservative government and with respect to all these policies. And yes, something had to give. Yes, change had to occur, but there's no way they're not going to have to walk back some of this stuff just because of the nature of how it's affecting people and unforeseen consequences to cohorts of people that for sure they didn't anticipate would be affected, that they actually would like to stay. But it's a crazy world. It is what it is. We'll continue to do these lives. And I want to thank you so much for being here, for supporting our channel. If you have not yet subscribed to the Canadian Immigration Institute, please do. Go to our website if you need help, book a consult. We represent people. We do. We work with them. We help you to file your applications. We do. It's not just a situation of us answering questions. It's super easy to do it on our website. When you're over here, all you have to do is just click on book a consult, and that's how we start all of the work we do. You can easily click on whichever lawyer that you want to work with. We don't use paralegals or assistants. It's just us and you. That's how we structure things. I also want to point out some of the other resources like our Express Entry Accelerator. There should be a link in the description below. If you're going through Express Entry or intend one day to go through Express Entry, please subscribe to this because you will have access to all future updates, which there will be once again, and the 2024 accelerator that I just created at the beginning of last year. As soon as the job offer rules kick in, then we'll have new episodes, new lessons updated. And every 2 weeks, remember, I have a masterclass where you can come in and ask very specific questions about your situation. And we do it in a group where everybody benefits from the questions that are being asked by others. We also have within our courses another one that if you do not realize that we have it, it's our Canadian Temporary Resident Visa course. And this one is currently on sale. And you can get more information as well on the Canadian Immigration Institute website. And all you have to do is, you can see it's only $100 Canadian. And so I recommend that you go check that out if you're looking at applying for a temporary resident visa. And then finally, once again, on our channel, you will see that we have a ton of resources. Our blogs, the podcast, we have our immigration newsletter that you can subscribe to, and of course, our YouTube channel. And our YouTube channel is where all these videos, as well as we broadcast, of course, to a number of different locations. But this is where a lot of our content is. And you can come here and pretty much search for any topic and we'll have information to guide you, including, once again, our Time's Up series, which is designed for all of you who are running out of time. All right, I better jump to my consult. I'm late for it. But thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. I guess I better get back here. And we will see you again next Wednesday, every Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. Mountain Time. We have our